Tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome distinguished guests, academic colleagues, students, supporters, friends to the inaugural professorial lecture of Meredith Marra, Professor in the School of Linguistics and Applied Language Studies. And a particularly warm welcome to Meredith's parents and brother who are with us this evening. I'm Professor Wendy Lana. I'm the Provost of Taringa, Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand's globally ranked capital city university and New Zealand's top-ranked university for intensity of research. And it's my very great pleasure to host you all this evening. I'd like to briefly introduce Professor Marra before I hand over to her for her inaugural lecture. Professor Marra completed her Bachelor of Arts with honours and her Bachelor of Commerce and Administration here at Victoria University of Wellington, majoring in German for her honours degree, before completing her Master of Arts in Linguistics. She carried on to complete her PhD in Linguistics at this university, rising through the academic roles to become an Associate Professor in 2015. She has been the head of the School of Linguistics and Applied Language Studies since 2016, served in that role for 4 years, and is 2 days in, she tells me, into her research and study leave after completing that. But much more importantly, she was promoted to Professor on the 1st of January 2019. Professor Marra is a sought-out plenary speaker, known for her cutting-edge methods and theoretical contributions in the area of workplace discourse analysis. She serves her academic community both as a member and former president of the Linguistics Society of New Zealand and as an editorial board member of several leading international journals. For the past 2 decades, Professor Marra has researched effective communication in New Zealand workplaces using recordings of naturally occurring talk through the Language in the Workplace project based here at the university. As the project director since 2015, Meredith has led the team which has carried out research into humour, small talk, meetings, miscommunication and management, as well as gender and culture issues. A guiding principle of this project has been to expose assumptions about how things are done around here to help newcomers and marginalised group members find their place at work. Professor Marra's primary research interest is in the language of business meetings, but she has also published in the areas of power, politeness, or indeed impoliteness, humour, and aspects of identity in a range of influential international journals. She has co-edited several books concerning the linguistics of work and supervises students in sociolinguistics and discourse analysis. Professor Marra's research into workplace talk has been used as the basis for key materials for a course aimed at skilled migrants, who often miss out on work befitting their education and experience due to lacking the social language skills used in Kiwi workplaces. She has been encouraged by the increasing number of policymakers who use and recommend her research-based findings, especially Immigration New Zealand, who have funded the Workplace Communication for Skilled Migrants course here at the university for several years. Now in this lecture, Professor Marra is going to use real-life examples to describe pass-the-parcel decision-making, explain the importance of chocolate fish, and the relevance of talking in lifts. Each of these ideas will illustrate how language research can contribute to empowerment. Please join me in welcoming Professor Marra to the podium.
Provost, members of the senior leadership team, friends and family, especially those who've travelled from quite a distance, including one who came 61 hours to get here today, and also ladies and gentlemen, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I'm going to talk about these things that you're probably thinking now, why on earth would they be interesting? What does pass-the-parcel have to do with the workplace? Is a chocolate fish just a chocolate treat? And what about talking your lifts? What's that about? And I hope that by showing you these various elements that we've come across in our data, I'm going to challenge you to help me help others. Because I recognise as an academic, we have a responsibility. We've got lots of power. We sit at the university. We hopefully have good knowledge and expertise, but we also deserve to give this back to the community. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So you're probably thinking about why we would do linguistic research in the workplace. When I started working in this area in the mid-90s, there was hardly anything on language in the workplace. And that seems like a very strange thing considering how much time we spend at work. Why weren't people looking at this? And what really existed was lots of surveys, lots of interviews, also expert opinion, people that were in the workplace themselves. But as linguists, we know that what people think they do is highly likely not to be what they actually do. And so this was an opportunity for us to go into workplaces and see what was really going on. And within that research, I've been particularly interested in professional identity. So if you're in the workplace, how do you navigate being a nurse, a builder, a corporate manager? How do you do this in your talk with other people? So that's what I'm going to talk about today. This area was, of course, quite a natural fit with me. You may have heard there that I have got an unusual background for a linguist, but not that unusual for a sociolinguist. When I came to this university in 1992, I thought I was going to be an accountant who spoke other languages. I'm not an accountant. Instead, I realised that I liked listening to what people were doing around me in that workplace. I liked to find out what they were doing with their talk. And so language in the workplace is a way for me to match those corporate interests with the linguistic knowledge that I have. And I've been very lucky because I've worked with a wonderful team of colleagues as part of the Language in the Workplace project. And those colleagues are here with me today. Emeritus Professor Janet Holmes was founding director of the project, and she's here. Also Dr. Bernadette Vine, who I've worked with all that time as well, and Associate Professor Maria Stuber, who was also a founding member. One of the things that's very important about this project is that we have a responsibility to work with the workplaces on things that are mutually beneficial. So our philosophy is very much about collaborating and working with people as co-researchers. So that means we identify issues that are of interest to us as linguists, but are also helpful for the organisations we're going into. And we take an appreciative inquiry approach. And by this I mean we go into places that are working really well to find out why they're working well. You can imagine that makes it much easier to get into places because people, if they're happy about their communication, will give us their data. But you might think, she's a linguist, what does she know about working well in some of our industries? And actually, it's not us that decides who are the best communicators. It's the industry, it's the colleagues, people who say to us, this team is working really well, can you come and tell us why? And so that's how we go into organisations and then work on these mutually beneficial goals. And throughout our processes, we also hand over control of the recording to the participants. So we're not in the room when it's happening, they're recording themselves. That means we don't get to control exactly what we get, but it means we get really good quality data because people are not scared of the recorder or hiding from the video camera, but they're happy to give us their data. So as well as these recordings, we spend time in the workplaces getting to know how they do things, getting to know what's important to them, getting to know where the important conversation happens, because it's not always in the boardroom. It might very well be at the water cooler. We get to find out that information and then record that data. And I've got some figures here of working with 30 organisations and 500 people. I think that's a huge underestimation at this point. I know that there are people in this room that have been part of this recording process. And I'm going to show you data. And I want to say to you, if you see data and you think that's a wonderful communicator, then it's definitely you. If you see data and you think that that's not a great communicator, then it's definitely not you. Because everybody seems to think everything is them. I think actually none of you are in the data today, but I'm very, very grateful that you've participated. When we started this in the 90s, we were using audio cassettes and Walkmans. This tends to make my students cringe at the idea that we had those cassette tapes. We used to have to put sellotape over the top of all the holes on the cassette recorder because people didn't know what to do with all the holes on it. We had to tell them to turn over tapes. Since then, we've developed through various stages and now use tiny digital recorders, typically attached to the non-dominant arm. So if you're a builder who uses your right hand to use the hammer, it's on your left arm. So they're tiny recorders now. And at the beginning, we had massive video cameras that it took two of us to move around. And now a camera can be a tiny thing that's just attached to a wall. So it's been quite a change over the lifetime. But I want to show you just a little video of what this was like at about 2000 when we had started recording in factories.
To help answer this question, we asked workers from successful factory teams in Auckland and Wellington for help. They agreed to be wired up to enable researchers from the Language in the Workplace project to study their workday conversations.
So you could see there were people in the factory getting the recorders attached to them so they could record what was happening every day for us. And it became as normal to them as it could possibly be, to the extent that we got data we really never thought we could get or sometimes wanted to get because they forgot the recorders were on them. The particular area of expertise I had when I joined the project was corporate organisations. And so for a long time I specialised in meeting talk. And you might feel this way about meetings, the last thing you want to do on everyday occasion. Luckily, I'm quite the opposite. I think meetings are wonderful. And when I became head of school, it was great because all my days consisted of meetings. But when I'm in those meetings, I'm looking at other things. I'm looking at who's taking the floor, who's summarising, who's controlling the direction, who's changing what people are thinking. That's what's going on in my head during those meetings. And at the beginning of my research in this area, I knew one thing, and that was that I was really interested in social injustice. And I wanted to look at what was happening with power. Who had the power? Should they have had the power? How could you challenge that power? What strategies could you come up with to resist that power if you needed to? And that's my thesis there, Decisions in New Zealand Business Meetings, a sociolinguistic analysis of power at work. And it's because we all know organisations are hierarchical. But what's going on when that power is being used? When I began, I used critical discourse analysis, which has since been renamed critical discourse studies, with an overt political agenda. It was about denaturalising the natural, looking at what we take for granted and saying, should it be that way? I still take a very critical approach, but I've kind of relaxed a weeny bit, partially because I found there are other ways of making things happen. And for me, it was more important that the change happened than I stuck with that framework. But I'm going to give you some data that shows all the different stages of my career, right from this time all the way through to what I'm doing now. And that's what the pass-the-parcel, the chocolate fish, and the talking in lifts represent, the 3 stages of my career. So some of you may have wondered about this beautiful photo that my friend Coralie took for me. This is to represent the kinds of things I'm talking about. We there have a set of hands representing the powerful people, handing something to the less powerful people. It happens to have a chocolate fish on it because we're in New Zealand, and you'll get the pass-the-parcel decision-making going on in this discussion I'm about to have with you. I warn you, I'm about to show you a transcript. If you haven't seen a transcript before, they're messy. We don't talk in full sentences. We repeat ourselves. We hesitate. So just be warned that this is what authentic talk looks like when it's written down. So I'm going to start with one of my favourite examples that I collected during my PhD data collection. This is with Queen Clara. Clara was the manager of this particular group. She had this nickname, Queen Clara, which probably tells you quite a lot about her management style. But she was very beloved within the group. She also had a lot of authority. This particular corporate team was charged with setting up the call centre for the multinational organisation they were working for. They had made a decision amongst them that this would all be paperless. So at the end of the 90s, being paperless was something that was quite new, but they'd made this policy. And then Harry raised an issue with her. He said that there'd been this request for screen dumps, and what he meant was printing down the screen so that instructions were on paper. And Clara just said, no screen dumps. No screen dumps. No screen dumps. And she also said that does not meet criteria, so very much like a robot. This is the answer. And you can see that people tried to challenge that idea, but she kept repeating, no screen dumps. And then with a little, thanks for looking at that though, at the end. So even she knew this was quite a power move to be doing this. And her second in command, Jock Sanderson, who was known by a nickname of his surname, Sandy, said, so that's a clear, well, maybe no? And she said, it's a no. And based on her nickname, he said, oh, it's a no, a royal no. They knew that she was in charge. She was not going to be outdone in terms of which, though. So she said, did people feel disempowered by that decision? But this is quite an interesting example in that it's a very overt display of her authority. Everybody knew that she was using power, and they accepted that she was powerful. What about the times when the power is much more subtle, more covert, more hidden? What about the decisions that appear to be very collaborative, but they're actually not collaborative at all? Is it clever negotiation by a manager, or is it hidden power play? And this is what I refer to as pass-the-parcel decisions. So right here are two generations of my family, children at birthday parties, looking forward to playing pass-the-parcel. So for anybody not familiar with the game, this is when a tiny gift is wrapped up in layers and layers of paper. It gets passed around a group of children in a circle. When the music stops, you get to unwrap a layer, and at the end, somebody wins the prize. These children all think that the speed at which they pass that parcel means they might get a chance to unwrap a layer. They also think that they have some skill in determining who will get the prize at the end. But only a child would think that, wouldn't they? I'm hoping that none of you are as naive as to think you have a chance of that prize. The parent controls exactly when the music stops, exactly who gets to open a layer, probably shares out the layers amongst everybody at the party, and they know exactly who will get the prize at the end. I would argue that managers are doing this all the time. And the reason I even had this idea was because I went to an old girls meeting where we were having a strategy discussion about something that the old girls were going to do. And at the end of the meeting, I turned to the woman sitting next to me and said, doesn't that look beautiful on the board? And she turned back to me and said, of course it does. She wrote that before she came. And I thought, oh, I'm a teacher, I should know that. I do that all the time. But so do managers. So this is an example of that Sandy you saw before doing exactly this. This is one of the small groups of Clara's bigger team. They were in charge of coming up with the policies for this call centre. There was also a communications team, and the policy people were probably quite quiet. They didn't really think they should be the people communicating this to the rest of the group. They thought Marlene, the head of communications, should be doing that. And so they say, we wouldn't be doing that, Marlene would be doing that, we would be telling Marlene. But Sandy responds to them by saying, I would like you to be doing this, I would like you to do the communications yourself, I would like you to work through Marlene. And I want to point that out, because you need to remember that I would like you to be doing it. Suggestion that he's making at that point. So at this point, he's not agreeing with their decision, but he's not being very, very authoritative about it. He's just saying he's using I as I would like, not you must do this. A fortnight later, the same idea comes up again. And Daisy raises it as something we still have to decide. So even though at the beginning she was adamant she wouldn't be doing it, now it's something we have to decide. Who's going to be doing this? Is Marlene going to be doing this? And Sandy suggests, it'll have more credibility if it's you that does it. Yeah, she says. You can see her beginning to shift. And then they move on to something else. And 10 minutes later, Seth, another team member, says, that's where we sort of question the involvement of Marlene. So again, that's quite ambiguous on paper, but you can see he's shifting towards the idea of why would Marlene be doing this? Why don't we do this? And then even later, we get Daisy suggesting the idea that they do it themselves. I think the more information you can give to the field, the more they actually talk about it. And Seth agrees, yep, and it's better. It's going to be better for us if we do this. So by this point, Daisy and Seth are proposing this as if it's their idea. And Sandy is really giving them compliments about coming up with this great idea. It's a big job we are starting on, so it's no longer them that's doing it, we are doing it. And if you do this, you can go from this job to being a spin doctor for the Prime Minister. Lots of praise. So really, Sandy made that decision all along. He just very cleverly got them to a point of thinking they were making the decision. And this is the kind of hidden power that you see happening in workplaces all the time. And it's not an isolated occasion. Later on, I'll show you an example where they were proposing a poetry evening for their clients, and instead it turned into a 17th century choir or a 17th century group that was going to perform. Quite a difference from the poetry evening. And again, the manager just moved them along until they came up with that idea, which is exactly what he was proposing at the beginning. So it's just like pass-the-parcel. He's deciding exactly what will happen. So there's kind of discourse strategies there, presenting things as an opinion rather than what has to happen, questioning ideas, hedging things, changing pronouns between what I want and what we'll do, and sometimes just not taking a turn, sometimes just leaving silence and letting other people come to the same decision you want them to come to. And these are typically very long decisions. They give the appearance of democratic decision-making, but really it's not democracy at all. It's still one person making all the decisions, because the outcome very typically matches what the powerful participant said at the beginning. Now, I can see those functions in lots of different workplaces, but the way it happens looks very different. And you can think about this in your own workplaces. Each time you change workplace, things are different, aren't they? There's different ways of doing things. There's different ways of doing things around here, depending on where you are. And this often happens through talk, because it's not just what we say, it's what that means in the context in which we're saying it. And this means the in-group is very important. And this doesn't necessarily relate to the country you come from. It might be that you're all in IT and that's more important than the countries you come from. Or it could be that the country is really relevant. Each team will be slightly different. And the thing that we focus on as the language in the workplace team is what's called socio-pragmatics. It's how we negotiate meaning between each other. So the same thing can mean lots of different things, depending on which group you're in. But how do we manage those processes of meaning making? For those of you who are very interested in theory, here's a very quick look at theory to keep you happy. We describe our approach as being social realism. So we have lots of agency to make choices in how we do our identity, but these choices are constrained by our interactional norms, by our community of practice or team, by the organisation we're in or the industry we're in, and by society. So there's all these layers that we have to navigate all the time. And this was a model we came up with when we were looking at effective leadership in Pākehā and Māori organisations. But more recently, we've been using this idea to look at newcomers to society. So in particular, skilled migrants and refugees when they come to New Zealand. And the reason that we're interested in this is because of what we call the linguistic penalty within sociopragmatics. So this is the price of being different. If you don't follow group norms, if you don't do things the way everybody else does, you're typically penalised. And it's because people think that if you don't do things the way they do, you can't do things properly. So even though you might be having agency and making choices to do things differently, because we're not very aware of our own sociopragmatics, when you deviate, it's not because you're a competent professional, it's because you're making a mistake. These things are so entrenched that we don't realise they're just norms. And they're not the way that everybody interacts. And that's because the way we talk matters. What happens is that people typically say that a newcomer doesn't speak English. Actually, they almost always do speak English, but they might have different socio-pragmatic understandings of things. For example, we do small talk all the time. I saw lots of small talk when I was in this room before. Can you imagine being in a workplace without small talk in New Zealand? Can you imagine being a newcomer who thinks that small talk does not belong at work at all, and watching all these New Zealanders talk to each other about inane things like the weather and rugby and what was on television? Can you imagine how different that might be? And you think that these New Zealanders are doing something strange, and the New Zealanders think you're very standoffish and probably rude for not joining in. So this socio-pragmatics is a really important part of it. And that's how I get to chocolate fish. Because I think chocolate fish is part of the socio-pragmatics for New Zealand. Knowing about chocolate fish and about rugby, as I said, and the Wellington wind and thanking the bus driver as you get off the bus, these are things that aren't shared. And most of you in the room probably have an understanding of what a chocolate fish is. But if you didn't, can you imagine the idea of fish with chocolate sauce on it? It probably doesn't sound that great to you. And the idea of chocolate fish actually coming up in the workplace, which it does all the time, probably seems quite bizarre as well. And this is all about belonging. We all learn to belong. We learn to belong as children. We learn to belong when we join a new institution. We learn to belong when we join a new group. What happens when you're having to join a new country and a new workplace and a new city and a new industry, and you're working at a level that's not the same as the level you used to work at? There are two of many dimensions to this belonging, but two I want to talk about. The place of belongingness, which is your sense of home and your sense of familiarity, and the politics of belonging. So I'll give my own example here. So I feel a sense of belonging to Victoria University of Wellington. My great-grandmother came here at the beginning of it being Victoria University of Wellington. Her daughter, my grandmother, came with her sisters. My mother came with her first cousins. I came with my second cousins. My niece Ibby, who is now the only female of the next generation, I hope will come with her third cousin, Awa. Now, Ibby has an aunt who works at the university. Awa has a father and a grandmother working at the university. I don't think those Henderson girls have a choice. I think they're going to end up here. And I will challenge you, Wendy. My niece Ibby thinks she's going to Harvard, with good reason. She's 10. You might want to offer her a scholarship now and get her here. So I have a sense of belonging. And I know what it means to be in this room. I know what it means to be in the Hunter building. This is part of my sense of belonging. In terms of the politics of belonging, part of what I've done is negotiate with you my belonging. I've told you I belong, but you also have to accept that I belong. Because this is a co-construction. I don't get to do this on my own. You have to find what I've just said salient. You have to accept that what I've said is an appropriate way of belonging. So this navigation is a very important part of belonging. So I want to look a bit at how this negotiation works in workplace talk through this notion of the chocolate fish. Here is Ibby, that niece, with her chocolate fish all over her hands and her mouth. This is when she was younger. She's 10 now. She can eat chocolate without getting it everywhere. She lives in America. She doesn't know what a chocolate fish is. She just knows it's something that comes in the mail from New Zealand. She knows it as a treat, but she doesn't know that there could be all these connotations around it. And when you look it up online, you get this definition. This is how people sell chocolate fish. A favourite reward for a job well done. That's an important part of the socio-pragmatics of what a chocolate fish means. Because otherwise it's just strawberry marshmallow with chocolate. But actually it's that idea that this is what you do. You get, you promise, you give for a job well done. So it stands for lots of things, and it has lots of connotations, and it has special meanings for different groups. So this is a really important part of our knowledge in the community. And I was reminded by my colleague Jean Anderson that it's one of the 3 F words of translation. Food, flora and fauna, they're very hard to translate because they have all these extra meanings. So chocolate fish is one of those things. And that's because of what we call indexicality. What are the symbols behind this concept? So when is a chocolate fish not just a chocolate fish? Sometimes these symbols are very direct, so it is a chocolate treat. I think that's pretty universal in New Zealand. We understand it as a chocolate treat. But indirectly, it's a small reward. Sometimes it's just the promise of a reward, and the reward doesn't actually have to come. Sometimes it's just saying whatever you did was worthy of a reward. And also maybe Kiwiana, nostalgia, childhood, all those other meanings. So you get the idea of a chocolate fish to the first person to reach their sales target, or that no chocolate fish for you if you don't cooperate. And this is something that you wouldn't expect to come up in the workplace, but as I said, it does. And it came up for me just recently. I received a chocolate fish award, and then I looked back and found I had another chocolate fish award. So this was given to me by the Faculty of Graduate Research because I was a panellist on a panel for new PhD students to talk about what it was like to supervise and to build a relationship with your supervisor. There's also a photo there of the chocolate fish that I got given on Friday by my colleague Bernadette Fine for finishing my head of school time. Again, a job well done. That's what she was telling me with this very fancy chocolate fish. That original yellow card came with a chocolate fish attached. The chocolate fish is no longer there, as you can imagine. But I knew exactly how to receive this. This was a really important thing for me. Now, it may have taken me an hour or so to prepare, 2 hours to be in the room. And this seems like, it's a piece of cardboard with a fish attached. But actually it was entirely appropriate. It made it worthwhile for me to have put that work in because somebody acknowledged I'd put work in. But if it had been more than this, that would have felt really wrong because all I did was sit on a panel. So it was a way of thanking me in a way that showed they knew that what I'd done was worthy of a chocolate fish. And as I said, it comes up in talk very regularly. This is a ministry, obviously a very professional, high-functioning ministry, and yet they're talking about chocolate fish. So the manager teases her junior staff member saying, "Emma, you're part of the solution," and Emma teases back, "I only want to be part of the problem." And she says, "Don't you dare be part of the problem. I'll keep giving you vitamin C, bananas, chocolate fish." So this is being used as a way of building in-group coherence and jollying along the team to get them to work hard as well. And then Emma is doing very well. She had more chocolate fish than everybody else last week, even though she couldn't eat them because of the holes in her teeth. But this is high-powered, and yet chocolate fish are coming up. And sometimes chocolate fish get extended into other ideas. So we also get the chocolate fish idea being turned into a chocolate frog idea. This is the example I talked about before, about that client function and what would happen. Would it be a poetry evening? In this case, they're talking about what will be in the goodie bags for the clients. And they talked about last year, they had chocolate fish, or actually it was chocolate frogs because it was a gardening theme. So again, this is a very important thing. They're giving gifts to their clients. This is a way of thanking the clients for being involved in their organisation. But they're going to give them the equivalent of a chocolate fish, something that seems so trivial. Again, as insiders, we go, "Oh yeah, that sounds nice, you'd get a chocolate fish." If you're an outsider, this is bizarre behaviour. So this is this power of the chocolate fish. There's lots of hidden meanings. These are small things, but they have meanings that the in-group members know about, and they're completely opaque to outsiders. And that social meaning of the chocolate fish actually does a lot of work. It talks about the lack of tolerance for power difference. You don't give a big gift, because that would suggest you've got lots of power difference between you. So it's a small gift. It's indirect. It's implicit. It's the not making too much of a fuss while still acknowledging somebody. It's showing that there's lots of equality in the New Zealand workplace, or the appearance of lots of equality in the New Zealand workplace. So it matches a whole lot of things that we would put under the Pākehā cultural order. And this is something my colleague Janet Holmes has written about the culture order in New Zealand and where this sits. So this chocolate fish does a whole lot of work. I'm not suggesting that culture is the same for everybody, though. You must know not all New Zealanders do the same things. Not all linguists do the same things. Not all women do the same things. But it's one of those things that has indexical qualities, and we negotiate these with other people. And I've chosen chocolate fish, but I could have chosen lots of other things. But there's lots of social meaning, and these are actually things we negotiate on a dynamic basis. It all means that we can all be involved in group norms. This is not something that just the majority do. We can all participate in this, but we have to be actively involved in that negotiation. And that negotiation is quite hard, and it shows that we have to be really dynamic when we're doing the kind of qualitative research that we're doing. We have to be quite in depth. We don't just go into a workplace and leave again. We're typically involved with that workplace for months. And with some of our workplaces, we're still in connections with them 15 years later. This is not something you drop in and out of. You really need to understand what's going on. That doesn't mean I can't give you hints that work every single time. If you're taking the minutes of a meeting and you can't work out when a decision happened, it probably occurred just before everybody laughed. Because everybody laughing is a signal that the tension's been relieved. So if you have to take minutes, you don't know what's going on, wait for the laughter, rewind a bit, whatever was just said was probably the decision. And the other thing I can tell you is every time somebody asks you a how question, how's it going, how was your weekend, how was your holiday, you can almost always answer with fine, thanks, and then ask them the question back to keep the small talk going. And if it's a what question, not much, and hand it back to them to keep the baton going between you and small talk. Those things are pretty foolproof. But giving you hints like that is not really helpful, because what you actually need to do is teach a woman to fish. So rather than handing out those tips, what we've discovered is much better is to look at the kinds of things to look at and teaching people to be their own analyst. Because we can't tell you what's going to happen in your immediate context with those people, but we can tell you what to watch out for. We can tell you about hierarchies. We can point out that these things are common in lots of workplaces. But more importantly, you need to learn how to be your own analyst. And this is something that's been put into practice within our school. So I've talked about the language in the workplace team, and in particular Janet Holmes and Bernadette Vine, who've been working with me for a long time. We have two amazing colleagues, Nikki Ridderford and Angela Joe, who have taken those research results and turned them into teaching materials, and using also ideas by Jonathan Newton here, and theoretical ideas about how to make that happen. And this is how we get to talking in lifts. So this is the course. It's a course called Workplace Communication for Skilled Migrants. It's been supported in particular by the Settlement Unit and Immigration New Zealand, and it's designed for unemployed and underemployed skilled migrants. So these are the stereotypical doctors and judges who come to New Zealand and end up working as taxi drivers. So they come to New Zealand because we need them. We have skills shortages, they come on those visas, and then they can't get work. And when you ask employers why they're not employing them, they say because they don't speak English, even though they do. So the people in these courses have to have been unemployed or underemployed for 2 years. They have to have tertiary qualifications. They have to have IELTS 6.0 for anybody who knows IELTS. They have to have experience in their industry. And our goal is to work with them to develop these analytic skills using a naturally occurring talk as the basis for the materials. So it's about developing appropriate communication practices and also getting experience. So it's a 12-week course, 6 weeks in the classroom, 6 weeks in an internship in a supported environment where there's also coming back into the classroom to reflect on what's happened. And this course has lots of people involved in Wellington. So as well as MB, who I talked about in Immigration New Zealand, there's also Rotary helps out with this course, and lots of other mentors help out. It has a very high success rate. Some cohorts, everybody gets employed, some only 80%, but only 80% is not bad for people that have been unemployed or underemployed for 2 years. And a preliminary cost-benefit analysis said for every dollar of taxpayer money that goes into it, $70 is returned to society. So it's a pretty good return rate for the country, which is also great because the alternative is New Zealand puts money into helping skilled migrants and they move to Australia. So we don't want that to happen when we really need these people in the country. So that's where the Talking in Lifts comes in, and I particularly want to talk about some resources that are on the Work Talk website that's up there that have used our research findings as a basis to help with the advice, and we've done this as a collaboration. Now, you've probably never thought about your lift etiquette. You've probably thought about which way you face. Yeah, you know which way to face in a lift. Have you thought about the fact that you actually talk to people in the lift? New Zealanders do this all the time, because standing on the lift silently is very uncomfortable. This is not shared. This is one of the things we do in New Zealand that other people don't. And somebody in the room was with me in Hong Kong, and before we got into the lift, he said to me, "Don't talk in the lift." Because he said talking in the lift indexed an identity that I did not want to have. So this is not something that's universal at all. A similar thing happened when I went into the women's toilets in the UK, and with two of my colleagues who didn't know I was there, they were talking to each other between the cubicles, and they said, "Listen to us talking to each other in the toilets. It's like we're in New Zealand." It made me laugh quite loud. They were sprung. I was there. I heard them. But this is the kinds of things that we take for granted. We don't think about this. So talking in lifts is something else that can be very problematic. And it's because of the socio-pragmatics that I've been talking about. This is part of socio-pragmatic competence. If you don't have it, it's very hard to participate. You can't be a full member of the group without this. And it's such a small thing. But if you think this is wrong, if you think small talk has no place in the workplace, it can be very, very difficult. And it means you can't negotiate your professional identity. You can't be seen necessarily as somebody who should join the workplace. And we always say failure to abide by these norms has real-world consequences. And they do, because if you don't do this, you might be seen as standoffish or rude, and you're definitely not employable, because who would want that person in their workplace? And all it is that we are dominant group members, and we expect people to do things our way, even though we don't recognise it's only our way. And so I'm going to show you one of those videos to encourage you to go and do these tests, because one of the things I'm very proud about that MB and the settlement unit did was every time there is a resource for an employee, there is also a resource for the employer. Both sides need to participate in this. So here's this video for you. Let's see how you'd get on. I assume you can all feel the discomfort. You felt what it was like to be in that lift, but it was discomfort for both of them. So if you have a go at these exercises on that Work Talk site, it gives you options as to what you would have done. If you were John, would you have done nothing? If he can't manage, it's his own problem. Or would you have tried to do a bit more? Or would you have talked to one of his team members to get them to get involved? And if you were Robert, would you wait for the next lift so you didn't even have to get in with the boss? Or would you not worry about it because he'll get it? Or would you make an effort to try something, even asking him if he's having a good day or something about the weather? And when you do this, it will say, "Oh yeah, good try," or "No, probably not," or "That's the best answer." So I encourage you to go and have a go and see how you'd get on in this situation. And if you don't have time to go through all the exercises, because they're all based on authentic examples of things that could be problematic, there's also a set of cards. And I've chosen the one here of fitting in and being part of the team, and some advice for how that would work in both directions. And I've lined it up next to one of the mentors from the Workplace Communication Program and what they said to a skilled migrant intern. So they were fully licensed to give opinions and advice on things that were happening. And Leo was talking to Isaac, the intern he was working with, and he told him to sit with people at lunchtime, learn the language, I'm guessing learn the socio-pragmatics is what he meant, listen to the jokes, participate. That's what he was being encouraged to do, because these things weren't coming naturally to Isaac. He was brilliant at his job, knew how to do it technically, lots of experience. This is what was hard, this participating. And mentors were in a very good position, or are in a very good position to do this because they have permission to do it. And this is a lovely example, again, of humour and how humour can be really difficult. So small talk can be difficult, humour can be difficult. In this case, Andre was talking to his mentor Emma, and he's talking about where he goes within the intranet to find things that are appropriate for him. And Emma says, just don't move anything or somebody will shoot you. And Andre reacts quite a lot to being told that somebody's going to shoot you. He is from a country where there would be this kind of violence, but I don't think that's why he's reacting. It's this, what does this mean? And Emma realised that he reacted and said, no, I'm joking, and then explains what the joke means, because he doesn't get it at all. He has no idea why she said this to him. And she explains the meaning behind it. When we say somebody will shoot you, they're going to tell you off. And she says, they won't really shoot you, I promise. And she also points out that if you're violent in the workplace, you're going to get fired. There's no way that would happen either. But it's humorous, and he laughs and recognises it was humour and thanks her. But she needed to explain what was going on. She hadn't thought about this at all. She was just speaking the way she would always speak at work. We've asked skilled migrants afterwards, after they've got the jobs that were appropriate for them, what it was like. And it's very sobering as a majority group member to listen to what they say. It's very telling. This might be quite challenging to you if you're a majority group member. So after the internship, I had somehow, to a certain extent, adapted to the New Zealand workplace. The communication styles that were very casual, the working environment, the attitudes, the work ethic, the core values, what she needed to survive. So this was really serious. It was about survival. This is what you had to do to get on. And she'd embraced it, and she knew what she was doing. Another person had some harsher things to say about us. How do you navigate this? And it was, I'm not sure if it's a good thing to show that you have lots of experience. You probably recognise the tall poppy syndrome coming through there. Don't tell people you can actually do this. It depends on the people, so again, it's dynamic. But my mentor said to me, with the experience you have, we expected you to understand. But actually it's about sociopragmatics. So yeah, had done this job for a long time, did get it, but not a realisation from the dominant group member that there were certain ways of doing things. Things were assumed to be common practice with no need for explanation. I'm taking steps to understand New Zealand work culture and people. I'm trying to understand how much diversity New Zealanders can take. We think of ourselves as being very open and inclusive. You can see how, if we're talking about chocolate fish and you have to stand in the lift with your manager, some of these things are really, really difficult. But I didn't want to end with a horrible message like that, where we all feel very bad about ourselves. I wanted to end with a success story. Some of you may have noticed that my middle name is Helena when you saw my thesis. So this is Helena, who was pseudonymed for me, and she worked really hard during the Workplace Communication for Skilled Migrants course. She really tried out new things and made the most of her experience. She, in this instance, is talking to her mentor, Edward, and she's been asked to do a stock take. She was an accountant, she was various accounts she was looking at. And he gives her a directive, and the directive is you can have a read through them if you want to. If you want to. You must read through these things if you want to. But she recognised that she was being told what to do. But she used humour. She said, do I have to? And laughed. She was really cheeky, but he found it very funny too, because he knew what he was asking her to do was very boring. So do I have to? And he laughed and said, it's really quite easy. This was them bonding. This was her using humour successfully. This was showing that she knew she was being asked to do something beneath her. He knew it too. They were just getting on together and being equal. So it's a lovely example of humour, which is so difficult to do, being successfully achieved by one of the skilled migrants. And I wanted to show you that it's also a two-way street. It's up to all of us. Negotiation of belonging is not something you can do alone. It requires all of us to be involved in this. I've raised your awareness, I hope, of lots of the socio-pragmatic differences. If you're aware there could be those kind of differences, you're more likely to see them and accept them and recognise that it might be the issue. It's not that somebody's being rude, it's that they do things differently to you. And if we recognise that, then we can negotiate through this idea of belonging. And that's really my challenge to you, to, when you're in these situations, just take a second thought and think, well, why didn't that go well? What was I doing that also didn't make that go well? Because language matters. It's not just speaking English, it's how you speak English. It's not just presenting ideas any old way, it's how you present them that matters. And tiny things can make a big difference. So recognising that you're using socio-pragmatic norms or you're following the way we do things around here, that's an important part of helping with successful communication. And it's important because when we do our jobs, we typically don't do them alone and in silence. We might be doing it through email or we might be doing it through talk, but people matter. We're not doing them on our own. It's very rare to have a job when you don't interact with other people. And this socio-pragmatics is part of these relationships. But I also want to argue that research matters. Because without the research, you don't know what those things are. So also we need the research to help us work out how to make sure people matter, to see what those subtle differences are, to see how we can be using language. And that's something that's been very important to me. That's probably the summary of my career over the last 20 to 25 years, is realising what power I have and what my research can do. So I want to end back on this photo. So I have all that power. My goal is to use that power, the power that I have as an expert in workplace discourse analysis, to empower others. I'm going to leave you with the challenge to think about what you're doing and seeing if you can empower others too. Thank you very much.
E nā mana, e nā reo, e nā karangaranga maha, tēnā koutou katoa. Nā mihi mahana kia koutou kua te mai, nei I tēnei pou. Ki te whakarongo, ki te kōrero wāhapu o Aorangi Meredith Marra. Ko Sarah Leggett toku ingoa, ko aho te amo o te wāhanga Aranui. Good evening, I'm Professor Sarah Leggett. I'm Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Te Wāhanga Aranui. And it's my privilege this evening to offer the vote of thanks on behalf of us all to Professor Meredith Marra for her excellent inaugural lecture as Professor of Linguistics at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. Communication, using language to share information and make social connections, is at the core of many human enterprises. And of course that includes communication in our workplaces, an area that was long overlooked in linguistic research. But that is no longer the case, thanks in no small measure to Professor Meredith Marra and her colleagues. In her lecture this evening, Meredith has given us a compelling overview of over 20 years of scholarship on workplace discourse produced by the internationally acclaimed Language in the Workplace project housed at this university, work that is internationally recognised as groundbreaking for its focus on naturally occurring talk and for its innovative methodological arguments and influential analytic models. The research-driven practice of the Language in the Workplace project is the exemplar worldwide of scholarship and practice on workplace communication and miscommunication, the discourse of meetings, cross-cultural communication, understanding power, and unspoken relationship rules. And Meredith's lecture this evening has confirmed that this high reputation is thoroughly deserved. Through the real-life examples that Meredith has shared with us this evening, whether pass-the-parcel decision-making exemplified by Queen Clara and Sandy, the direct and indirect symbolism of the chocolate fish, or the significance of small talk in lifts, she has reminded us of the key role played in communication by assumptions and shared understandings that go beyond linguistic competence. This is research that is of particular relevance in the contemporary globalised context of workforce mobility, in which employees move increasingly between jobs, countries, professions and industries during their working lives for a whole raft of reasons, often necessitating the navigation of new linguistic environments and different workplace cultures. It's in this context that Meredith's research plays a pivotal role. When the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment wants to ensure migrants and refugees successful employment, they are able to draw on Meredith's expertise. When community and other agencies and organisations want to understand the effectiveness of conversations in a breadth of work settings, from tourism to aged care, from building sites to hospitals, they are likewise able to turn to Meredith and her colleagues for expert advice. Meredith's engagement and deep links with her community of practice, evidenced by the presence this evening of professionals from government and community agencies and organisations, speaks to the way in which she and her colleagues have created partnerships between the university and the sector that are mutually beneficial. This work is a model of what we mean when we talk about research with impact. Because this is research that is not just interesting for its scholarly value or fascinating for those of us who work in New Zealand workplaces similar to those analysed. This is research that matters, that has a real impact on people in workplaces, in communities, that can change behaviours through awareness and concrete strategies. Meredith seamlessly intertwines her experience from the corporate world with her scholarly expertise and rich data sets to create knowledge and resources that are accessible, relevant, and able to affect real change in workplaces and in individuals' lives. Meredith, this is research that directly matters to the people whose experiences you study and who you empower not only through the outcomes of your work, but also through working with them and seeing them as, in your words, collaborators and co-researchers. It's an approach that is highly respectful of others and deeply empowering. So thank you, Meredith. We're enormously appreciative, and I think we'll all leave this evening with a greater appreciation of the significance of what we say in lifts, of the social meaning of chocolate fish, and with a heightened awareness of the way in which our interactions at work are based on assumptions about shared understandings. I think you've also reminded us of the need for us all to reflect on our own responsibility in ensuring the success of newcomers' settlement and sense of belonging. And finally, I think we'll also leave this evening reminded that we are very fortunate to have the Language in the Workplace team at this university, and equally fortunate to have retained Victoria University of Wellington alumna, Professor Meredith Marra, at this university. So thank you, Meredith, for an insightful and thoroughly enjoyable inaugural lecture as Professor of Linguistics. I now invite everyone to stay and join us for refreshments through in the Hunter Common Room. But before we adjourn there, I'd like to ask everybody to join me in thanking Professor Meredith Marra once again for an excellent inaugural lecture. Kia ora.